I'm going to try again. Hello. Good afternoon. That's better. We're not having audience participation. You don't have to answer back. Thank you for returning after lunch. I hope you enjoyed your stroll. A beautiful view of Edinburgh and an excellent lunch as well. The next panel has a long title and a short title. It is Collaborating for EDI, Content, Accessibility, Outreach and Recruitment. That sounds like an academic monograph. Or simply, it's the Even Up panel. My name is Anthony Cons. I'm from Liverpool University Press. Joining me on the panel are Jess Miles from Bristol University Press, Paula Kennedy from University of London Press, Shannon Kneis from Manchester University Press, and Kim Williams from Princeton University Press. We've all learnt from Stacey Scott, who I'm delighted to note is in the room, that a fuller description can be important as part of an inclusive introduction. So I'm a white male with glasses in the chair, while the people doing the real work are 4 white women, which paints a visual picture but also highlights some of the structural issues that we'll be discussing today. So, what is Even Up? In a nutshell, it's a community, that word again, of learners, a social infrastructure for university presses in the UK and Ireland who want to explore the issues around social justice. It does not attempt to provide comprehensive solutions. There are other organisations that are doing great work in this space, such as C4 Disc, and instead began as a safe space with a simple premise. We want to do better, but this stuff is hard, so let's talk. One of the great joys of the group has been the sense of collaboration among presses, where the world's oldest university press has shared generously with some of its newest, and where those newer presses have informed best practice with the old lags. One of the essential elements of Even Up is that it shouldn't be another virtue signalling brand exercise. Even Up has established itself in a short space of time because, and this is a very technical description, people do stuff. This panel then showcases some of the stuff that has been done so far. There will be people in this audience who are far more expert on these themes than we are, and we'd love you to speak to the group. In fact, some of you already have. What we hope the presentation shows is that there is an opportunity for UPs to knowledge share, and even better, to admit ignorance as a starting point for growth. We hope more presses are encouraged to participate. Each speaker will talk for about 10 minutes. If you have a question, please submit it via the app, or try and remember it, and we should have plenty of time at the end of the session when the speakers have finished. I'm now going to hand you over to Jess, who will talk about the Even Up work with schools. Thank you.
Oh, I'm just going to move this down a bit. Thank you, Anthony. I think our slides are probably on here. Yes. So my name's Jess Miles. I'm Digital Marketing Manager and EDI Lead at Bristol University Press. And I am chair of the Even Up Schools Working Group, which also includes Anthony, Katie Evans, and Lola Onasanya from Manchester. There's our names there. So why did we want to set up the Schools Even Up Working Group? I think in publishing, we see that many, maybe most of the applicants for entry-level jobs are highly qualified, highly educated, often to master's or PhD level, and they often have a publishing master's, even for those very, very much entry-level jobs. So that there's a lack of diversity in the applications we get. I have a personal interest in this because quite a few years ago, we signed up to do the government's Kickstart scheme, which was a DWP scheme aiming to get 16 to 24-year-olds on universal credit into employment. It's been withdrawn now, obviously, but even there we saw all the applicants were master's students. They were all publishing master's students. So why is this happening? Why have we got such a narrow range of people even applying to come into the industry? And I think it's to do with a lack of knowledge and understanding about publishing. So one of the ways we can start to fix this or look at this is by working with local secondary schools and telling young people about publishing to broaden that pipeline. I think if they're aware of the industry, the roles in it, the skills needed, they're then more likely to explore opportunities if they see them and feel like it's something that's potentially open to them. If we speak to them early enough, we could impact on their GCSE and A-level choices. And so kind of open up their pathways for the future. And it's also about reaching people who haven't already got those connections, friends or family in the industry. I can't quite see the screen down there. Thinking of Christie's talk this morning, it's also about adding value to the local community. If we as university presses can provide educational opportunities and career information to the young people in the cities we're in, I think that's a really valuable contribution that we can make to the community. Universities will always, I think, have a civic engagement mission, and that's something that speaks to. So I think a lot of it is about UPs being part of the cities they're in and not just in a bubble. This also speaks to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which will all be familiar now. That's becoming part of our missions, part of university missions. This work is about Goal 4, which is quality education, specifically 4.4, to substantially increase the number of youth and adults who have relevant skills for employment. And also Goal 8, which is decent work and economic growth, to substantially reduce the proportion of youth not in employment, education or training. And it does also speak to poverty, the goals around poverty and inequality as well. We all know that this kind of work takes time. We need to put resource into it. So it's important to address the benefits to us as businesses. And I think one of the most important benefits the school's work could bring is that, especially for younger staff in our organisation, it can be an opportunity to learn skills around management, presenting and training. I think bringing young people into our organisations is going to give us new perspectives. It would be interesting to see how they perceive publishing and what the future of publishing might look like and what might matter to them. It brings opportunities for cross-team working. In some of the sessions that we've done, we've had people from each department come together and work on a presentation or work on a project, and that's been really, really interesting and beneficial. And essentially it's about being learning organisations, I think, trying something new and being brave sometimes. As Anthony said, many of us are doing this already. Even Up is about learning and kind of understanding we don't always know what we're doing. So what's in scope for the group? Bringing young people in-house. So these are the kind of activities that we're thinking about doing and are doing as part of the schools group. Bringing young people in-house for talks or office visits, going into schools, potentially working with schools on their career days. Even Up have set up a fantastic programme of speakers and webinars. Stacey Scott did a wonderful one. Thank you, Stacey. And Heidi Mulvey from Cambridge. I'm not actually sure if she's here. She's their head of community engagement, did a brilliant talk on schools work that's actually inspired quite a lot of what we're doing in the group. We're also creating and sharing resources. We now have presentations for Year 12 groups, Year 9 groups. There's a primary school one. Thank you, Caroline. So it's about it's saving work for each other, really. If we can do a bit and then give it to someone else to adapt, I think it makes it a lot easier to do. Work experience is a big part of this. I'll say a bit more about this later, but it's not something that we've done much of at Bristol yet, and I'd be really interested to talk to people who have done work experience, placements. Really, it's about sharing ideas, best practice, like all these Even Up groups, and supporting each other. Potentially with the schools work, there's trickier bits around risk assessment and health and safety, which we can advise each other on. I mean, that aspect of it has not been that onerous from what we've done so far. So bringing this all together into a thing, we set up the Even Up Publishing for All Schools initiative. And this was an initiative that we launched on World Book Day this year. Bristol, Cambridge, Liverpool, Manchester and Princeton basically came together and said, okay, we're going to commit to doing something with schools this year. It was press released, it was covered in the bookseller as part of their World Book Day coverage, which was very exciting. And we're really keen to build this now to get more university presses to sign up for 2025, 2026. And it just involves a commitment to connecting with a school in your area, connecting with your university's widening participation team and see if there's anything you can do with what they're doing. There's also lots of organisations and charities that run these kinds of programmes, so that could be a way into schools as well. I wanted to give you a couple of examples of what doing this looks like. The first is, every year at Bristol University Press, we run a session on a programme called Creative Industries Unlocked. It's set up by the University of Bristol Widening Participation Team. It's a 6-week programme for year 12 students, I think they are, so they're about 16. And every week they have a 2-hour session with a different creative industry in Bristol, and we do the publishing one. It's aimed at students from areas of low participation in higher education. And we talk about publishing, different people in the organisation talk about their roles. We talk about the skills you need to get into publishing so they can start to see that it's something achievable for them. And it's gamification, it's trying to make it fun, it's keeping them engaged, which is a challenge. I've learned to keep 16-year-olds engaged, but I actually got lots of advice from Bristol's widening participation people, so the presentations we've developed have that in mind and work well, I think. And we got good feedback. The young people said that they felt more enthusiastic about publishing after the session than they did before they started. So I'll take that as a win. Manchester worked with an organisation called Inter-University, which supports young people from disadvantaged neighbourhoods to attain their chosen aspiration. This organisation has 35 centres across England and Scotland. I had a quick look at the list, and I think there's actually one in most cities where we have UPs, so this could be a useful avenue. Manchester delivered 1-hour sessions to year 11 classes on the university campus. And it's similar things. They did activities around what's fiction, what's non-fiction, academic versus trade. Katie from Manchester said an activity that went down really well was they had a chance to design their own book. So they designed the cover, gave it a title and wrote the back cover copy. And it's all about boosting that confidence and creativity and just getting them to learn about publishing. And all of these, we can share presentations with you if you're interested in doing it yourselves. So what now for the schools group? Really, we just want to keep momentum now. It's hard to find time, but it's a long game, and it feels like something that could make a difference. The Even Up Publishing for All, we want to bring more university presses next year on Wild Book Day so we can do another press release and show that more people are involved. I think we're all different sizes of press here, and there are, if you're a tiny, tiny press, I think there are still small ways that you can get involved, and this kind of work is quite nice because it's contained. You could do one talk a year to one group of school children, and that would still make a big difference, I think. If you are interested in anything like that, my email's on these slides, and I'd really love to speak to you. Or if you're doing work already in this area, it's about, I think a lot of Even Up is about kind of just collecting everything together that we're doing. Working group will continue to meet. We meet about 6 times a year. Yeah, work experience is something I would really like to look at now. I think it's all very well saying to young people, here's publishing, here's this lovely creative industry that you could have access to, but then we need to be able to give them something to do with that information. Keep creating more resources, looking at different age groups. Maybe we could do something with Even Up branded worksheets about publishing. And these organisations that support young people, there are quite a few. I've put a resources slide at the end of this. But there's Speakers for Schools, Inspiring the Future, Inter-University. There's also one called Social Mobility Business Partnership, which I haven't looked at yet, and there will be more as well. I was speaking to Katie at Manchester recently, and she was talking about doing video presentations. So we wouldn't even have to go into the school. We could create something that teachers could show young people. And yeah, and maybe connecting with schools directly on social media. It can be quite onerous to go through the university, so that might be another way of doing it. And really just, to find out what other people are doing, what you guys are doing, and bring all that learning together. So thank you. That's the resources slide. I assume these will be available for you. And you can email me if you'd like to talk about it. Thanks very much.
Hi everyone, I'm Paula Kennedy. I'm Head of Publishing at the University of London Press. I'm here to talk about the work of the Even Up Recruitment and Career Development Working Group. So our working group is chaired by Caroline Priday at Princeton, and you can see the members of the group here. We have representatives from Liverpool, Bristol, Cambridge, University of Wales Press, Manchester and Edinburgh. At the moment, we're always open to new members. And the group, it's important to note that the group represent different roles within publishing and career stages. What's in scope for us? So this slide shows that some of the areas that we're either working on or will be working on. The working group was formed as career development and recruitment were identified by the wider Even Up collective as a priority area to focus on. There's a diverse range of publishers within Even Up, from larger organisations like Cambridge and Oxford to smaller presses with only 1 or 2 members of staff. For small and medium-sized publishers particularly, the size of the organisation can make discussions about career development and creating opportunities and networks for staff particularly challenging. The working group's already been useful for its members and the wider Even Up collective, and I think this draws a bit again on what Christy was talking about this morning with community building. These areas on the slide show where we've been able to share resources and information across the publishers involved, for example, how presses are adapting their recruitment processes, or sharing experiences about both what's worked and what hasn't. Discussions on these topics are helpful, again, especially for smaller publishers who usually don't have a dedicated EDI lead in their publisher. The focus for all of these working groups is on learning together. We're not mandating any specific actions that the presses involved have to follow, as often it's not clear-cut to implement change, especially again for the smaller presses or those whose recruitment processes have to more closely align with their university host. Really, it is about sharing experiences and expertise, drawing attention to existing resources and tools, and important work being done elsewhere, particularly by AUP and C4DISC, that maybe some Even Up members don't necessarily have access to or might not be aware of. So today I'm focusing on 3 broad areas that the group's been working on. Some of the partner organisations more broadly that Even Up publishers have worked with or identified as useful, and information sharing across the group. Career development and networking opportunities that we're creating within Even Up publishers, including the new Even Up mentoring scheme and the early career group, and lunch and listen sessions for staff, which Jess just mentioned. So first up, partner organisations and information sharing. And I thought in this forum it might be quite helpful to share some of the specific organisations which publishers within Even Up have either worked with or identified as useful in supporting EDI activity in different ways. And just to pick out a few on the slide, Creative Access, who many of you probably will have heard of, are a social enterprise providing access, opportunities, support and training in the creative industries for people from underrepresented groups. They work with a lot of academic and trade publishers as well as universities, and they did a presentation to the Even Up group about their work and how publishers could work with them. LDN Apprenticeships. They offer a publishing apprenticeship that many of you probably have heard of, where nearly half of their apprentices are non-graduates. These kind of schemes help to bring different voices into the publishing industry and are open to both new entrants and existing publishing staff looking to get a comprehensive grounding in all aspects of publishing. Publishers within Even Up are also partnering with them when recruiting, such as Bristol's recent publishing assistant role, which includes study time and the apprenticeship programme alongside the publishing role. And there's the 10,000 Interns Foundation, who run 2 programmes, the 10,000 Black Interns programme and the 10,000 Able Interns programme. These both offer students and graduates paid internship opportunities across a range of UK industries. Bristol, again, worked with the foundation in the last couple of years to offer a 6-week programme where interns gained experience across all their publishing departments and libraries too. The programme's been a key part of their EDI widening participation strategy. Other organisations on the slide highlighted by Even Up publishers include Yellow Submarine, an Oxfordshire charity supporting those with learning disabilities and autism, and the Spare Room Project, which was relaunched by the Society of Young Publishers. Across the group, we've also shared resources that can be used and adapted by different presses. Oxford, for example, shared their inclusive recruitment guidelines with us, which other presses, including my own, have then used to inform discussions and try to make tangible changes to recruitment practices with our own university HR teams. The next area is on career development and networking. As I mentioned, a lot of what we're doing across Even Up is sharing some of the valuable information and resources already out there, rather than duplicating this activity. This includes highlighting existing networks which might offer our staff development opportunities and ways to build their own contacts. These include the Society of Young Publishers Network, which offers events and mentoring, and of course the ALPS Training Hub and programme of events, which are particularly valuable for many of our presses. However, it's worth noting that not all of our publishers within Even Up are members of ALPS or other organisations like AUP or IPG, usually to do with the costs of membership for these organisations for presses with really limited budgets. Because of this, we thought it might be useful to create a couple of new networks for staff in Even Up publishers to make sure that these opportunities for network building and development are open to all. Christy mentioned the early career group in her session this morning. This is at a nascent stage, but particularly following the pandemic, we wanted to ensure that staff early in their publishing careers are able to access networks for support, learning and advice without being limited by location or the financial constraints of their individual press. The group was originally initiated by Princeton and Edinburgh University presses, who have held 4 online meetings for early career staff so far on topics including hybrid working, time management, and managing people. Our working group is now talking about how best to take that forward and what the best format will be. So Caroline at Princeton has been very involved with this, and there's been interest from a range of publishers within Even Up in being involved in this. We think regular online meetings on different topics led by the group might be a useful way to do it, with a physical meetup in a different location each year, perhaps linked to ALPS events, for example. As I say, this is all at an early stage, and we'd really welcome thoughts and ideas on this, what would be useful to make it a valuable forum for staff at an early stage of their career. We're also pleased to be launching an Even Up mentoring scheme. Again, I think it's important to say there are some fantastic mentoring schemes that already exist, by ALPS, of course, along with others like AUP and the Society for Scholarly Publishing, amongst many others. But as mentioned before, not all publishers have access to these. The latest C4 DISC Workplace Equity report, published a few weeks ago, highlights the importance of formal and informal mentorship and its impact on careers. Our aim with the Even Up mentoring scheme is to offer the very diverse range of presses involved the opportunity to participate in a mentoring scheme that's particularly relevant to university press communities. The mentoring programme is now open to applications from both mentors and mentees from Even Up publishers, with a deadline of 15th of July. The matching process will run over the summer for the mentors and mentees being paired, and the scheme is due to start, I think, in early September, with the expectation of pairs having 6 hour-long sessions over 12 months. Where possible, the scheme offers pairing between mentors and mentees from underrepresented groups, if that's something applicants feel that they would benefit from. Details on how to apply and the application form will be shared by existing members within their organisations and by the Even Up JISC mail list. So if you're interested, please do sign up to this list. The scheme, again, has been developed by Caroline at Princeton and Jess at Bristol. So if you'd like more information or have any specific questions about this, please do get in touch with them. Their details are on the slide. And finally, the last area of focus I wanted to mention are the Listen and Lunch webinars, which Jess also just mentioned. We've been running these over the last 18 months or so. Invited speakers from both Even Up presses and external organisations come and talk to our staff on a variety of topics. These have been really useful again for skills development and sharing expertise across the group in ways that help us to make changes in our presses, whatever their shape or size. So far, as just mentioned, these have included a brilliant session on accessibility by Stacey Scott. And thank you again, Stacey, for that session. It really was really inspiring and helpful practically for a lot of us. We've also had sessions on rethinking diversity in academic publishing by Annemiek Sahar, Professor of Race and Media at the University of Leeds and an expert on issues around diversity in the creative and cultural industries. We had the session from Heidi on schools engagement and their work with local schools, which Jess mentioned. And recently a talk from publishing leads Helen Bugler and Celia Kingston at LDN Apprenticeships on publishing apprenticeships, which I previously mentioned. That talked about the practical side of running the scheme within a press and had someone from my own publisher, University of London Press, sharing his experience of the apprenticeship and its benefits both for his own career and the work of the press as a whole. We run these webinars kind of every 2 or 3 months or so, and our next webinar is on the 27th of June, focusing on squiggly careers, being run by colleagues in Cambridge. This is a particularly useful topic, I think, for us. Many university presses are usually relatively small and can lack clear paths for career development within a specific department, unlike larger commercial publishers. And often roles in small university presses are very wide-ranging and varied, giving us skills which can lend themselves to jobs outside publishing, but still aligned to universities and research. So we're looking forward to that one. And then finally, I've just kind of included a few of the useful groups and resources that exist which we thought might be useful to highlight in this session, including the Publishers Association Inclusivity Action Plan that has 10 concrete steps that presses can have a look at and take. In terms of future plans for the group, we're continuing to meet every few months and recently created a dedicated Teams group to support our work and offer space for members to raise questions and share experiences about what they're doing. Like all of the areas that we're discussing today, our work in this space is an ongoing discussion. We'd really love to open up the conversation, especially around recruitment practices and organisations that people have worked with to support EDI initiatives around career development and recruitment, or potential speakers for our Listen and Learn sessions. So please do come and speak to any of us in the group who are here during the conference. We'd love to hear from you. And now over to Shannon on inclusive content. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Shannon Kneis. I'm Senior Commissioning Editor for Social Sciences at Manchester University Press, and I'm here as a member of the Inclusive Content Working Group, which is also made up of members from Liverpool, Westminster, LSE, Bristol and Edinburgh UPs. So to begin, why inclusive content for Even Up? So we wanted to explore the idea of inclusive content because inclusivity goes beyond just diversity of workforce or authors or boards, but affects other publishing practices too. So for example, citation practices, naming policies, peer review, non-traditional formats. We've seen growing trends in social science research and funding around participatory research and mandates around the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We want to look beyond what we might call Western approaches to knowledge, and we're aware that the global north bears the responsibility for creating some of the world's biggest problems. The working group is mindful to not replicate many of the great initiatives that are already going on around equity and diversity. So instead, we've created this group to be a space to understand how we're addressing these issues, particularly given the many challenges involved. We've joined because we want to see more equitable and diverse knowledges exist, exploring possibilities beyond metrics to think through and learn together for how we can embed our ethics into our publishing practices. So what do we mean by inclusive content? Here's a snapshot of some of the topics that were coming up in our initial mind mapping as we were creating the group. Obviously, there's lots of overlap and there's more topics beyond this. But for our kind of initial stages of work, we wanted to pick 3 areas to focus on. So the first is diversity of authorship, meaning who gets commissioned and how do characteristics such as age, gender, race, disability, religion, career stage shape who our authors are and therefore what content we produce. Second is epistemic diversity, meaning what knowledge is being platformed. Are different ways of knowing acknowledged and celebrated? What implicit and explicit hierarchies exist in the processes of reifying and validating knowledge and research? Here we try to take lessons from authors, academic and activists who are doing really important work in decolonising knowledge and institutions. And then our third point of focus for the group is Global South publishing. So as publishers situated in the global north, what possibilities and responsibilities do we have to Global South authors, knowledges and readers? How would commissioning Global South content enrich our publishing? What barriers exist in commissioning and distributing content about and in the Global South? And what harms might we be perpetuating in setting this agenda? So one of the things we've done to get into these questions is we hosted a show and tell session where each member of the group brought an example of either something our own press is doing or something we've seen someone else do in the field of inclusive content. In keeping with what we've already been talking about as ourselves as community of learners, we wanted to see what's already out there with the aim of building an informal database of example and reference points. We have only had one session so far, but it did go well. It offered inspiration. It helped to really unpack the meaning of what inclusive content could mean. And we also gained a sense of how these initiatives feed into broader press priorities. Some examples of the content we discussed are Edinburgh's ECR Support Hub, a fantastic resource for early career researchers, and particularly of interest was talking through the challenges of offering content in multiple languages. Another example was Bristol's author and content tracking, and we talked through the kind of opportunities as well as the limitations of introducing KPIs and metrics on authorship and content. For future show and tell sessions, we're bringing in external speakers to do lightning talks and workshops. This includes inviting authors who are situated in the Global South, researchers who facilitate Global North, Global South collaborations, as well as organisations such as AuthorAid, Kara, Penn, and African Minds. So another thing we've been up to is that Sven Botha, who's a scholar at University of Pretoria and a member of Professors Without Borders, which is also known as ProWibo. They're a charity and a think tank who offer training programs for students in the Global South. Motivated by our strategy to better understand Global South publishing, we arranged the workshop so we can ensure that we're co-producing both the agenda and potential solutions. It's important to foreground that Sven is based in South Africa, and he very much spoke to his own situated experience and knowledge. But some of the key take-homes I wanted to share with you that we learnt from that session. So first is that the overlap between the challenges in the Global South and Global North, the kind of Venn diagram was actually quite sizable, and in fact more than we were first expecting. Library budgets are being cut, ECRs need mentoring, there's a lack of stable employment for academics to move towards, and there are concerns with inaccessibility of the hardback monograph model. On the flip side, we also talked about factors environments which are specific to a region or place in the Global South. And here we talked about things that were specifically rooted in socioeconomic circumstances, as well as government and institutional requirements. Another important take-home for us was that there's a fluctuating perception of open access content. So it was conveyed that there is a feeling that with the increase of OA content, there's perhaps a declining quality of that OA content, which really complicated our notion that open access is automatically more desirable or better for readers in the Global South. Thirdly, the session taught us to be aware of blind spots and to encourage us to ask more questions. So, for example, Sven spoke in depth about the sorts of requirements that South African researchers are required to fulfill to have their research recognised by government. So, for example, in making sure it's a double-blind peer review process. Being sensitive to different requirements, whether that be of a funder, government, or institution, is something as UPs we're always adapting to, but we need to be making sure that we're kind of making space to ask the right questions, particularly for different contexts and regions, and ones we might not be automatically familiar with. And then finally, we had a lengthy discussion about whether co-publications can provide sustainable and equitable forms of publishing. This is a thread we're hoping to take forward in our next meetings over this year. And we're hoping to speak to a network of publishing professionals in the Global South to see what collaborations could be worthwhile for all. Another thread we're exploring in the group is the potential of putting together an open access collection as a useful, tangible way to meet the aims of the group. So we've been talking through an option which would centre around marginalised voices and perspectives, or a focus on research from the Global South. Exploring this project is very early days, and so far we've had a meeting with JISC and Lyrasis. Having the UK and US perspectives has been really helpful, and I just wanted to pick out a couple of items that we're continuing to think through as a group that came out of these sessions. So first is that being inclusive and free to read are not synonymous for open access. Lyrasis were interested in hearing about what we as publishers can offer beyond the output of publications, and emphasise that they would want to recognise value emerging from building relationships, broadening diversity and being inclusive, building networks to create paths for scholars beyond just a kind of involvement with a one-off scheme was very much a priority for them. The second is that they are fully engaged with the sensitivities and challenges of Global North and Global South partnerships and power dynamics. I was confronted with the question that if we, as Global North publishers, are pursuing more content with Global South authors, are we taking the best work from the region, hampering local publishing opportunities? And then finally, there was a question about whose voices are still being left out. For example, with new and existing political and ecological crises, how are scholars who are being displaced coping, and what support can we as publishers offer? This will be very familiar for people who work and organise in and around EDI, but I did just want to take a moment to kind of reflect, those last 3 slides are a snapshot of the work we've been doing, and this process has very much informed our sense of the challenges involved with doing this kind of work in and around inclusive content. And so just a brief reflection on what some of those challenges are. In the initial days, we were kind of creating a list of tangible actions we could go through and tick off, but it became very clear that collaboration and space for discussion with a slower thought is actually where our value lies. With varying press priorities and expectations on this subject, and as we're talking about, sometimes quite sensitive or political topics, we needed time to build trust to create meaningful dialogue. And given that we're a group of people working for Global North publishers, we are mindful of our positionality and sat with some discomfort that our well-meaning intentions exist within power dynamics and institutional structures that mean we can easily perpetuate the issues we're actually attempting to change. So what's next? So we have actually only been a group in our current form for 3 or 4 months. So we're still fairly early days in shaping our strategy. But currently our future plans are building a database of case studies of inclusive content, practices and examples, as I mentioned before, hopefully sharing this information in a blog format. We'd love to keep the conversation going about co-publications and what this might mean, particularly in a digital and OA market. We're currently finalising our list of speakers for our show and tell sessions for the rest of the year. But mainly our priority is to kind of continue to use this group as a forum for thinking through the challenging issues that you do see in inclusivity in content. So if you're interested in coming to speak with us, join the group, or have suggestions for who we should be in conversation with, we'd really love to hear from you.
Hi, everyone. I might need to cut a little bit so we can get to the Q&A, so just bear with me if I look slightly perplexed for a moment while I figure that out. Let's see, are we there? Yes, I also can't see. Jess, I'm just going to pop on this side. We need a booster step. I'm Kim Williams. I'm a digital and audio publisher and co-head of Princeton University Press in Europe. I lead Princeton's accessibility working group with my colleague Kathy Felgar, who's in operations. My background's digital and audio and intellectual property. And I just wanted to take a moment to celebrate with all of you here that I love working in a sector of publishing that's so committed to positive change and lifelong learning. That's not something we should overlook as a shared experience. So thank you everyone for that. This segment is about the accessibility working group of Even Up. I'll talk a bit about what that means for us. I have a few case studies about of how a few university presses are thinking about and implementing accessibility. We've also got a few recommendations at the end of the deck, and I've shared the names of the group. I probably won't run through that due to time, but it's all there if you'd like it afterwards. We did try to build the slides accessibly. That's a learning curve for all of us, so feedback is super welcome on that. So just briefly, what is it we mean by accessibility? I've heard the word here several times today, but in this context, it's specifically about accessibility requirements which meet various international standards, the European Accessibility Act, the Americans with Disability Act, and there are others in the world. Those standards set benchmarks for quality, but that's for everyone who uses the internet or technology, online banking, and digital files, and many other arenas. In this case, a rising tide lifts all boats. They're helpful for everybody. The goals of those directives are pretty simple: to ensure that people across the world have equal access to opportunities and information and technologies. The implementation of those goals, not quite so simple. We're all living that at the moment. I'm glad to say at 12:30 tomorrow, there's a panel on the European Accessibility Act with Stacey and others. It's a great group of panelists, and I think they should dig into some things that we haven't quite covered here. So as you've seen with others, why did we choose to focus on accessibility? One of the joys of Even Up is the chance to work alongside other curious and committed people. So many of us share a mission to make high-quality scholarship available to readers across the world, and it's so clear that accessibility helps us to do that important work. I'm also going to nod to Stacey, but thank you. Stacey hosted a session for the group last year, shared her expertise in breaking down barriers to accessibility for published materials, and that really provided a launch pad for the group that really kicked us into gear. So thank you very much. We had over 80 people on the day, I think, and then many more have watched that video since, so it's a great resource. Thank you also to my colleague Brecca Brennan, who's here. She's now chairing our subgroup, and we'd love to welcome more people to it. So there's lots of existing guidelines and resources for accessibility. We're talking more about practicalities of implementing it in our kinds of contexts, small and large university presses, with different levels of resources. And so Even Up, it enables us to share our expertise and understanding. It enables us to dig into complex areas and really sense check our workflow. We want our collaborations to lead to a more consistent experience, and that's for staff, because often they move around between the companies, for our authors, who are also often shared, and for our readers, who are picking up the books on the other side, or the journals on the other side. With that in mind, here is what is in scope for most of us. So the directives, including the European Accessibility Act, they're pretty specific about what they cover. The requirements are to provide equitable access to a wide range of online and digital services and products, including websites, e-commerce, e-books, and journals. Shouldn't be new for anyone in this room, I don't think. One of the things for us to wrestle with is the way different services connect. So we can make a beautiful, fully accessible e-book, but if we send that out to partners and then their reader or their browser isn't accessible, then there's a limit there. So some of the work we're doing is communicating those challenges. And for us, it also felt natural to explore other ways that university press publishing is accessible. That's physical spaces, virtual and in-person meetings, shared documents even, and other elements of our work. And that's where we begin to overlap with equity and inclusion initiatives to really ensure that colleagues, authors, readers, we want them to feel a sense of belonging to this community, and it is a community and one that we celebrate. It's pushing on an open door, really. People want to share ideas and want to be inclusive, so the group is about sharing knowledge, information, and tools to help that become embedded, and I think the key is also efficient, right? We know that lots of people are doing bits of the work, and we want it to be clear that where that's shared and where that's doubling up. And we recognize, too, that small changes contribute to feelings of belonging. So we've been celebrating wins like just automating closed captions so that the person who's on the meeting has a choice about that, creating accessible documents, making sure spreadsheets don't rely only on color distinctions. I love a colorful spreadsheet, but it's not available to everyone on our team, and it took me a while to realize that. It's been super useful. So the next few slides showcase accessibility progress at 3 different university presses. Thanks to Emma Gallen for this summary. University of London Press is a small publisher with a tiny team, but they have a sizable backlist compared to other predominantly open access university presses. They have hundreds of titles. Backlist remediation will be a strategic priority for that team. Budgeting and resources are going to be real challenges, and the team is learning as they go. Their policy has been to share responsibilities across departments, and where there are constraints on time and budget, to focus on step-by-step decisions which are going to have the biggest impact. They made lots of progress in meaningful ways. There's lots of that on the slide, but just briefly, they built accessibility into their new website, which launched in 2023, so they're really focusing on that from the outset. Their accessibility review late last year evolved into a full project plan to improve accessibility of their publications, and they've really made changes to the early part of the workflow to make that as simple as possible. Members of the University of London Press team across books, editorial, production, sales and marketing, and journals, they're each responsible for accessibility in their own areas, but there's an accessibility lead coordinating that across teams, which is great practice. New guidelines for their authors will be in the 2024 iteration of the author pack around alt text and other features. And backlist remediation, they're focusing on open access titles. An audit's being carried out on the books, and the results are being reviewed to determine practical steps, budgeting, and resource requirements. They're working towards drafting a full accessibility policy and a statement. And that group has really enjoyed working with Even Up for signposting ideas, best practice, and identifying shared challenges, of which there are many. Manchester. Thanks to Jen Meller and the team at Manchester for all of these insights that I'm going to share. So Manchester sees collaborative effort as key to meeting and exceeding accessibility goals. They've focused on practical steps to ensure books are created accessibly as possible in the beginning, and they've set up revised ebook specifications with typesetters and project managers, and they're also looking at backlist remediation and scoping that out. Interestingly, they're looking at design principles with their design team and freelancers, because if you get the design right in the first place, it impacts all formats of the book and then helps with plans for cover designs or the web pages or catalogs. Things to consider here, there's some tips towards the end of the deck, but color contrast, font size,
Ratios, navigability, maps, for example, should have high contrast between adjoining areas, or you can signify boundaries in other ways. Often it's just layering more than one tool to make sure that you're reaching as many people as possible. They're looking at their content platform with their sales and operations team and their platform provider, and they're going to complete accessibility impact assessments, those aims, for existing and potential customers, which should be a really useful tool. And they're sharing best practice, solving challenges with their own accessibility working group, and then crucially connecting that in with their digital and website working groups, with the University of Manchester Disability Support Service, so really connecting with the parent institution, and then even up as well. And then slightly more solid ground for me, this is Princeton. We've been discussing accessibility at PUP as part of our equity and inclusion work, but actually our efforts really crystallized when we formed the working group itself. When we had a central location for discussions, we found there were many ways that people were already working on accessibility, but quietly in different groups. So what we're trying to do is make that more efficient and purposeful, so we're not duplicating efforts. One example is the social media teams writing alt text for social media posts, but some of that could also be used for advertising or other online sectors. So we have our working group that guides the decision making and the budget, but we have 3 subgroups actually that do lots of the heavy lift. Digital content and alt text is one subgroup. We have a kind of an employee experience, which is about physical spaces and groups and, excuse me, lost my notes for a moment there, about the physical spaces and the documents and things that we engage with. And then the last group is the website team. We asked staff to make suggestions, and actually we had some really good ones coming in that helped us make changes, including those closed captions that I mentioned. We've been producing EPUB 3 for several years, so one of the things we could do is say, well, where books don't have illustrations or equations in them, they're almost accessible already. They need a review and they need the metadata, but then we can hit that bar and then signal for people that those books are available. Our publishing is very broad. We have a wonderful art books program and a nature list. We have textbooks, monographs, books for general readers. We are absolutely still working out how to handle alt text for co-published and packager projects. The ebooks have only just started to exist for those, actually, so there's a lot of people in that chain of conversation to figure out. I ran some numbers. Over 85% of our books this year have illustrations or equations. So the decisions we're making in the group, they're super important for our readers and hugely significant to budget and workflow. We have books with over 1,000 images. We need to make smart decisions on those. We are currently talking about the use of colour in print and ebooks. Our design team is coming to work on policy, but trying to create policy that covers the nature field guides, upper-level neuroscience textbooks, monographs, the whole range. It's hard to pin that down, and people are eager to go to exceptions, but we have to be able to kind of move forward purposefully. We're working really hard to make sure that we don't compromise accessibility for beauty, but or vice versa, right? That we're not sacrificing anything in the process, but also just challenging embedded thinking about what looks good and what is useful. We certainly need to kind of refresh some of that thinking. We've updated our accessibility statement. That's available. Our author guidelines about alt text are also available on our website if that's useful for anyone. And we also just spoke to a lot of publishers. We really benefited from embedded expertise. So again, thank you everyone in here who's consulted on that. The last slide I actually plan to delve into is about backlist accessibility. A lot of our conversations have come round to that, and then I'm going to wrap up. We often end up talking about accessibility for books that are already published and in the market. Numbers of those vary from publisher to publisher. We began digitizing our backlist about a decade ago. We have about 10,000 backlist books, but that's about 35 times as many books as we publish each year. It's really hard to fit that into workflow. I know publishers in this room have much larger lists and smaller lists, but for all of us, those micro details often have macro implications. An area of consensus, though, is that we all want to offer high-quality, accessible products. We're not talking about meeting minimum viable standards. We really want to get there and align what we do on accessibility with our publishing missions in general. We're all worried about costs and workflow, especially with kind of spiraling costs in all areas of the industry and difficulties with sales at times. We're being careful about who we trust with our intellectual property, who gets our files and what they do with them. And then we're making decisions about workflow, whether we consult with authors, whether we ask them to engage with that. And we're learning alongside our vendor partners. We really can't get these books out into the market without the partners also making sure their platforms are accessible. What's been so valuable for me is to find thought partners in accessibility. I think when I've been wrestling with decisions and struggling with knowing how to move forward, it's just great to check in with the group and just talk about what's the next right thing to do in this space. It's such a great group. I hope more people will join us. That is it for me. I know we're going to rush to questions, so thank you. Back to Anthony.
I'm going to stay sat down if that's okay. Thank you very much to our panellists. That was 4 big, useful presentations, very much appreciated. Any questions from the floor, please? I have some, obviously. Over here.
Yeah, this is Kenneth Ross from Zuni Press, a Global South publisher. So first of all, thanks for a great session and really inspiring to hear of all that's being done for justice and inclusion. But you'll not be surprised that my question is about co-publication between Global North and Global South university presses. And Mizuni Press has recently had a very good experience of co-publishing with EUP. But I think it'd be fair to say this is at an experimental stage. So I'd be interested to hear from the other presses, just to reflect on your experience of co-publishing with Global South presses. What's been difficult and challenging, what's been successful and productive. Thanks.
Thank you. I can speak to that, but does anybody else want to come in first of all? I can say, so Liverpool has collaborated with African Minds in co-publication, and that's been a fantastic experience. Very, very smart publisher editorially, and a great experience to broaden the audience for scholarship in South Africa. We have only positives to mention. The challenge, of course, is to achieve any sort of scale behind that. I'll say separately, and I think in due course in another forum we might talk about it. The Association of University Presses has done a lot of work around global partnership, and we ran a pilot a few years ago, which was really interesting. The level of challenge. Liverpool, for instance, was paired with a university press in Uganda. And things that we take for granted, like stable internet, was a problem. Particular political contexts were a problem, and that was a huge learning experience for us. But also feels like a big opportunity, and we don't want to be in that position of a sort of patronising Global North trying to find solutions to Global South. Actually, this is about maximising the audience for scholarship around the globe, and I think I'm really heartened to hear of your experience with Edinburgh, and I hope there's more of this to come. To be honest, anybody else want to come in on that?
Just to say, the Inclusive Content Working Group would love to have you come in and share your experiences with us, if you'd be up for that.
Well done, Shannon. Any other questions? At the back there, please.
Hello, I'm Bernie Folan from OASPA and also sit on the steering committee of C4DISC. Thanks everyone for a really inspiring talk. I just said to my colleague next to me, I want to get into publishing. Sounds great. I think I'm a bit old though for some of your schemes. I've got 2 things. One is that C4DISC wants to be in service of amplifying all of the good work that's going on in publishers everywhere in the scholarly communication ecosystem. and sharing practical stuff that people have done that's worked and things that haven't worked. And I've been talking with Amanda Whiting here at Alps about how we need to join up more all of the different initiatives that are going on. So I'm just kind of highlighting that's something we want to do. So I'll be in touch with you all. We want to do some really practical sessions on sharing knowledge and practical experience. I keep saying practical because I think there's lots of words out there, but we need to see what's going on so that it can be replicated. So that's one thing. And the question I have is, I remember being at a session years ago, and it was John Sack from Highwire, actually, who made this suggestion, and I love it, and I think about it all the time. And it was about how do we find people when we're out and about in our lives who have really strong skills that might be transferable to publishing in all sorts of different industries that have nothing to do with publishing, but we can see that they'd be valuable in our organisation. So it's not about, it's about just finding people in the world who are underrepresented maybe and who would be good. And I just wondered if anyone's done any work in that area, because it's something I think about trying to do a lot and I don't quite know how to start. So, I got served in a bar in Dublin Airport yesterday by someone who had amazing customer service skills. And if I was in leadership, I'd want her in my organisation. It's that kind of thing I'm talking about. Thank you.
I can say it creeps a bit into recruitment, but I can say to that, at Bristol, we've been doing a bit of work, like looking at the different places that we advertise, maybe moving like outside of industry publications like the bookseller, and there were lots and lots of spaces for advertising, especially around like Black and minority ethnic, creative access, that kind of thing. So we are trying to reach out to specific groups. And I suppose the answer to your question is just thinking a bit more broadly about what we do and also what we ask for. So we don't need publishing experience for a lot of the roles in our organisations. And actually, like you say, hospitality, those jobs where you're dealing with people and interacting with people bring lots and lots of valuable skills that would be incredibly useful to us as organisations. So, yeah, and I think probably through recruitment and even up, it's just about broadening out where we're putting these jobs. Maybe extending beyond our own networks as well and kind of making proactive decisions to reach out to different people.
Thank you.
I would just say I completely agree with all of that. And I think when we first started Even Up, we did have discussions, didn't we, about organisations that presses had worked with on recruitment, different types of job board, with mixed success. I think that's one of the experiences when you mentioned what hasn't worked. That was valuable, actually, to see which were the useful ones, which are not so useful that you might have anticipated would be. And I think the more of that we can make transparent and share across the group, the better, actually. So it'd be great to kind of work with you on that, for sure. But I completely agree about the transferable skills. I think there is a real gap there, actually, about how do we find people outside the usual networks. And it does take a lot of proactive work to do that and thought. And I think we're at quite an early stage still with that.
Thank you. I'm very conscious that we're eating into coffee time already. So I'm afraid we're going to have to cut the questions off. Please do speak to us in the break or elsewhere. Before we thank the speakers, I want to mention a couple of people who I think are in the audience. Caroline Priday's name's come up a lot. She's one of the co-chairs of Even Up. And so is Jo Godfrey. Where's Jo Godfrey? She's here as well. So too is Jess, and so too is Philippa Grant, who's not here. It is is she? She's lurking. Yeah, I mentioned. Anyway, the gang's all here. But it is a voluntary effort of engaged people, and none more so than our speakers. So please join me in thanking them again. Next sessions will be in here or out there, one on metadata and one on collaboration between university presses. Thank you all very much.